I was 30 seconds away from walking out of that restaurant when the waiter said the 7 words that changed everything. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened that night at Romano's will make your blood boil. Picture this. You're sitting at a table with 5 people you've called friends for years, people you've celebrated with, cried with, spent thousands of dollars treating to dinners and trips, and they're all acting like you're invisible. Not just ignoring you, actively, deliberately pretending you don't exist while you sit right there. That was my Thursday night in Portland, and it was about to get so much worse before it got better. I should have known something was wrong when my phone stayed silent for 3 hours after I texted the group chat. Looking forward to tonight. See you all at Romano's at 7. No hearts, no thumbs up, not even a simple see you there from any of my so-called friends. But there I was, standing outside Romano's Italian Bistro in downtown Portland, adjusting my new navy dress that I'd bought specifically for Sarah's birthday celebration. The October rain had just stopped, leaving the sidewalks glistening under the warm restaurant lights. I'd driven 40 minutes through traffic, paid $20 for parking, and spent an hour getting ready. The hostess, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, looked me up and down with barely concealed judgment. "Table for one?" she asked, her tone suggesting I was some pathetic creature dining alone. "Actually, I'm meeting friends. The reservation should be under Sarah Chen." Her finger traced down the reservation book with deliberate slowness. "Oh yes, party of 6. They're already seated. Follow me." My heels clicked against the hardwood floor as we walked past couples sharing intimate dinners and business associates closing deals over wine. The restaurant buzzed with conversation and laughter, the kind of warm atmosphere that should have made me feel welcomed. Then I saw them. Sarah, Jessica, Monica, Rachel, and even David, who I'd introduced to this group 6 months ago, all crowded around a circular table near the window. The empty chair sat between Jessica and Monica, but something felt off immediately. They were leaning in, sharing some private joke, their body language forming a tight circle that seemed to exclude the very space I was meant to occupy. "Hi, everyone," I said, approaching with what I hoped was genuine enthusiasm. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Traffic was insane on the bridge." The conversation died. Not gradually, not with natural pauses, but like someone had hit a mute button. 5 pairs of eyes looked up at me with expressions ranging from mild annoyance to complete indifference. "Oh," Sarah said flatly. "You came." The words hit me like a slap. "You came." Not, "You made it," or "Great to see you." You came, as if my presence was unexpected, unwanted, surprising. I forced a smile and pulled out my chair. "Of course I came. It's your birthday." Jessica whispered something to Monica, who covered her mouth to stifle a giggle. Rachel was suddenly fascinated by her phone screen. David, who I'd helped get his current job through a connection, wouldn't even make eye contact. The temperature at that table felt 20 degrees colder than the rest of the restaurant, and I was about to find out this was just the beginning. "So," I said, settling into my seat and reaching for the menu. "What looks good? I'm starving." Silence. Complete, deliberate, calculated silence. The waiter appeared like salvation. "Good evening. Can I start anyone with drinks?" "We already ordered," Sarah said curtly. "We've been here for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. They'd been here for 20 minutes before the reservation time, having their pre-dinner without me. The message was crystal clear, and it stung worse than I wanted to admit. "I'll have a glass of the Pinot Grigio," I told the waiter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually," Jessica interjected, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we're doing separate checks tonight, just so you know. Separate checks. After 2 years of me quietly picking up the tab for group dinners, birthday celebrations, impromptu happy hours." The irony was about to become devastatingly clear. The waiter nodded and disappeared, leaving me alone with 5 people who were treating me like a stranger who'd wandered into their private party. Monica leaned across the table toward Rachel, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure I heard every word. So anyway, as I was saying about the wedding venue, she spoke as if I wasn't there, her tone making it clear I was being deliberately excluded from a conversation that had apparently been flowing freely before my arrival. "The gardens at Emerald Heights are stunning," Rachel replied, matching Monica's energy. "Perfect for photos." I knew Monica wasn't even engaged. This was theater, performed for my benefit. "I've been to a wedding there," I offered, trying to bridge into the conversation. "Last summer. The sunset views are incredible." Monica's eyes flicked to me with the kind of look you'd give a child interrupting adult conversation. "Mm-hmm," she said dismissively, then immediately turned back to Rachel. "Did you see the pricing for the weekend packages?" The waiter returned with my wine. "Are we ready to order?" "We already ordered our appetizers," David said, his first words to me all evening, and they were designed to emphasize how behind I was, how separate from their group. "I'll have the bruschetta," I said quietly. "Actually," Sarah said, her voice carrying that particular tone women use when they're about to deliver a calculated insult, "we ordered enough appetizers to share, but I guess if you want your own." She shrugged, the gesture saying everything. You don't really belong here anyway. The next 40 minutes were a masterclass in social exclusion. They discussed plans I wasn't invited to, referenced inside jokes I wasn't part of, and shared stories from gatherings that had apparently happened without me. Every attempt I made to contribute to the conversation was met with polite but cold acknowledgement before they immediately redirected away from me. "Remember that hilarious thing that happened at Jessica's housewarming?" Monica said, launching into a story about a night I'd apparently missed despite never being told about it. They laughed and reminisced while I sat there, sipping my wine and pretending to find their story amusing. But inside, a cold realization was settling in. This wasn't accidental. This was orchestrated, and I was about to discover just how calculated their cruelty really was. The main courses arrived, and with them, a new level of humiliation. While they continued their animated conversations about shared experiences I'd been excluded from, I found myself studying their faces, their body language, the careful way they positioned themselves to create a wall around me. "Sarah," I said during a brief lull, "I wanted to give you your birthday gift." I reached into my purse for the carefully wrapped jewelry box, containing the silver bracelet I'd spent weeks selecting. "Oh," she said, accepting the box with all the enthusiasm of someone receiving junk mail. She didn't open it, just set it aside like it was an inconvenience. "Thanks." The dismissal was so casual, so cruel, that I felt something shift inside me. But Jessica wasn't done. "You know," she said, her voice carrying that particular pitch that signals incoming cruelty, "we were just talking before you got here about how some people just try too hard. Like, they insert themselves into every situation thinking they belong when really..." She paused, taking a sip of her cocktail, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke. Monica picked up the thread seamlessly. "It's like when people can't take a hint, you know? Like read the room. They weren't even being subtle anymore. This was open season, and I was the target." Rachel nodded sagely, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Some people are just so desperate to be included that they miss all the social cues telling them they're not wanted." I felt my face burning, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for my wine glass. But something else was building inside me. Not hurt, not embarrassment, but a cold, crystalline anger. David, emboldened by the women's cruelty, decided to deliver the killing blow. "It's actually kind of sad," he said, not looking at me, but speaking clearly enough that every word landed like a physical blow. "When someone's so lonely, they'll force themselves into situations where they're obviously not welcome." The words hit the table like a grenade. Other diners were starting to notice the tension, the way 4 people were systematically destroying a 5th while she sat there taking it. But here's what they didn't know about me. I don't break. I calculate. The table went quiet. They were all looking at me now, waiting for my reaction, probably expecting tears or a defensive outburst, or maybe just for me to quietly leave like a wounded animal. Instead, I took a slow sip of my wine and smiled. Not a hurt smile, not a fake smile, but the kind of smile a chess player gives when they see checkmate coming. "You know what's interesting about desperation?" I said, my voice calm and clear. "It makes people do the most revealing things." The temperature at the table seemed to drop several degrees. Something in my tone had shifted, and they could sense it. I was reaching for my purse, planning my dignified exit, when fate intervened in the most spectacular way possible. The waiter appeared with the check presenter, approaching our table with professional efficiency. What happened next was so perfect, so poetic, that if I'd written it myself, people would say it was too good to be true. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed your meal tonight." He glanced around the table uncertainly, then looked directly at me. "Ma'am, should I charge this to your account again?" The words hung in the air like a nuclear bomb waiting to explode. Again. 5 faces turned toward me with expressions of sudden dawning horror. Sarah's mouth actually fell open. Jessica's eyes went wide with the realization of what was about to happen. Monica looked like she'd been caught stealing from a church collection plate. The waiter continued, completely oblivious to the social apocalypse he'd just triggered. "Your usual table has quite the appetite tonight. The total comes to $437. My usual table. Because I'd been here before, many times, paying for group dinners, celebrations, casual get-togethers. Always quietly, always without making a show of it, always happy to treat my friends. The friends who had just spent an hour and a half telling me I was desperate, pathetic, and unwanted. You could have heard a pin drop. Every nearby table had gone silent, their conversations dying as they sensed the drama unfolding. The social dynamics had become unmistakably clear to anyone watching. These people had just humiliated their meal ticket. I stood slowly, my movements deliberate and controlled. Every eye in our section of the restaurant was now focused on our table. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby tables could hear every word, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I looked directly at Sarah, then Jessica, then each of them in turn, letting my gaze linger long enough to make them squirm. "You see, I was under the impression I was attending a birthday celebration with friends." I opened my purse and pulled out my wallet with theatrical precision, the sound of the zipper cutting through the silence like a blade. "But it seems I've actually been funding a performance, a rather expensive one, where a group of people I've repeatedly treated to dinner have decided to—" I paused, pretending to search for the right words while the waiter stood frozen, clearly uncomfortable, but unable to leave. "Well, I suppose the term would be, bite the hand that feeds them." The silence was deafening. Other diners were no longer pretending not to watch. Even the busboy had stopped clearing tables. The entire restaurant had become an audience to this social execution. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice still calm but carrying the kind of authority that comes from absolute moral clarity. "I'm going to pay for my own meal, just mine. And then I'm going to leave you all to figure out how to split $400 worth of food and drinks among yourselves." I placed exact cash for my portion on the table, $38 including tip, the bills crisp and deliberate. Sarah found her voice first, panic making it higher than usual. "Wait, you can't just what?" I interrupted, my eyebrows raised in mock confusion. "Can't just stop paying for people who've spent the evening treating me like garbage. Can't just withdraw my financial support from people who apparently find my company so unbearable they have to stage elaborate humiliation rituals?" Jessica was frantically calculating in her head, and I could see the exact moment the math hit her. $400 split 5 ways, $80 each, for people who'd clearly planned this evening expecting someone else to foot the bill. "Look," David said, his previous confidence evaporating like steam, "maybe we can work something out." "Oh, now you want to work something out?" I smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "How fascinating. 5 minutes ago I was desperate and pathetic. Now that your free dinner is walking out the door, suddenly I'm worth talking to. The beautiful thing about public humiliation is that it's a two-way street, and they were about to learn that lesson the hard way." I slung my purse over my shoulder and looked at each of them one final time, letting the moment stretch until the discomfort was unbearable. You know what the saddest part is? I would have gladly paid for everyone's dinner tonight, just like I always do. All you had to do was treat me with basic human decency. But instead, you chose cruelty. You chose to humiliate someone who's only ever been generous with you. The waiter was still standing there, check presenter in hand, watching this social execution with the kind of fascinated horror usually reserved for car accidents. "But here's the thing about burning bridges," I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing them to lean in to hear me, making them complicit in their own destruction. Sometimes the person on the other side was the only thing keeping you from falling. I turned to the waiter, who was clearly trying to process what he'd just witnessed. They'll be splitting the check 5 ways. And given their delightful personalities tonight, I'd strongly recommend adding the automatic service charge. Then I walked away. Behind me, I could hear the explosion beginning. Frantic whispers, angry hisses, chairs scraping as they huddled together trying to figure out damage control. The sound of people realizing that their cruelty had just cost them $80 each and their primary source of free entertainment. I stepped out into the Portland night, the cool October air hitting my face like freedom itself. My phone was already buzzing with texts, probably desperate attempts at damage control, maybe even apologies. I turned it off without reading any of them. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way, and some lessons are worth $400 to teach.